So what I'm showing here is a video that which was constructed of the oral history of a Australian person from the 1950s of the waterfront in Geelong, which is a kind of area, an area that was very industrial, had a Ford factory, but which is closing down, but it's now much more about entertainment and things like that. So the idea of the images, I started off with an oral history, and I had to annotate that with different images. And so I started to try and look for images. There were sort of strategies I used. I started to use Google Maps, animating that to sort of talk about some of those kind of spaces. Sometimes I use some line animation to try and get the gestures that were being spoken about. And also I then started to look on archives for different kinds of images of those spaces that were available. When I started looking for film, of course, that has been so sort of colonised in terms of the cost of getting film material to kind of use in a film is so expensive that I started to look much more at photographs of those spaces. And I came to the conclusion, in a sense, that depending on when those photographs or those images were taken and where they came from, they spoke of the time when they were taken. There was something implicitly, inherently present within the aesthetics of those images that spoke of those times that they were taken. So two of those archives were one from aerial photographs from the 1910, 20 and 30s taken of the Geelong area, which were highly high definition, high contrast, black and white images, aerial photographs by Charles Daniel Pratt, who had his own archive of those images, who created those images in the 20s. And another one was the industrial photography of an Australian design photographer called Wolfgang Sievers, which these images were all from the 60s and 70s, in a sense that I felt spoke of that time. Now the issue for me, I think because of information, of speed up and everything, the question for me is how much is inherently communicated through these images themselves, through their aesthetics. So one of the things that I did was these two sources of archive, one of Sievers and Pratt, I looked historically into their history to see if that history was somehow implicitly embedded within those photographs themselves, given that we're now in this situation where we need to communicate so much more quickly through the images themselves. So I will tell you some of the things that I found out about Richard Pratt, for example. So Charles Pratt, you'll see some of those aerial photographs sort of later, but Charles Pratt lived from about 1890s to 1970, and he started work as a grocer in New Zealand, and he came to live in Geelong after the First World War. And he enlisted in the army from 1914 to 1918 and served in the Gallipoli campaign, which is a very defining kind of campaign in terms of Australian and New Zealand history. And he was wounded there, and he also worked in the Egypt and Palestine campaigns, serving in the New Zealand Engineers, and he received the Victory Medal. His final service was in the Royal Flying Corps, and he rose from private to lieutenant during this service. And there are a number of photographs in the New Zealand archives of crashed and captured planes from this period attributed to Pratt. So his whole engagement with photography sort of was integrated with his work during the war. And after his war service, Charles and his brothers established a factory in Geelong called the Geelong Air Service Pratt Brothers, where they assembled de Havilland planes and offered joyrides to the public, as well as providing flying instruction. And Charles taught his brothers how to fly. So the other interesting is Geelong was accidentally chosen as a place for Pratt to live, where he took a lot of these aerial photographs, like this kind of image you see here that I've contrasted with the Google Maps image. Because he had bought a shipment of planes in Egypt after the war, in the early 20s, found it a difficulty in moving them from the docks in Melbourne in transit to New Zealand due to an industrial dispute. So his idea was to go back and live in New Zealand, and he got stuck in Melbourne. And as a result, he assembled his plane there and started flying around the Bay Area, discovering what was called the Belmont Commons, and established that as a place for joyrides, and leased that area and began living there. And the Pratt brothers were very technically integrated. They even started a motorcycle business in Geelong in 1932. And one of the other, Frank, became a successful motorbike racer at the local racetrack, which Pratt also recorded on film. So these photographs that I've used that are attributed to Pratt and are attributed to Pratt and his company Air Spy. And the First World War trained many pilots in air photography with improved technologies requiring both a pilot and a photographer. Aerial photography had come of age in the Palestine campaign by augmenting inadequate maps of the Turkish front. And from the 20s and 60s, Air Spy became a significant innovative enterprise in regional Victoria and Geelong and Melbourne. Independent researchers Mansell and Riley say that it was a Harry Shaw and a Herbert Hansen who were really part of this organisation, and they weren't very clear about really Pratt's involvement and how he became involved with Air Spy. But anyway, because it was the Pratt's estate that donated the Air Spy collection to the State Library of Victoria, his name is connected directly with this collection. And under his name in 1972. That collection was consequently digitised in the early 2000s. For my purposes, pre-1950s photographers are legally out of copyright, so it was very easy for me to download those images online and integrate it into my work. These images were usually found by simple searches with beach, Geelong, waterfront, etc. And sort of derive on the internet, which is kind of roaming, and all this was really unearthed by coincidence and expanded on through online inquiry. In some ways, this kind of digital search, reiterates sort of digitally, Pratt's own more physical situation of roaming around, immobilised in Melbourne Wharf and trying to find a place to live with his aeroplane, which was much more of a physical kind of action. Akin to Pratt's encounter with the Melbourne Wharves, research at the Geelong Heritage Centre had proved much slower than at the Victorian Library because they had not digitised their collection, and it required searching through physical filing systems, microfiche, and descriptions of images. And you needed a day's notice to view the images and negotiate their use. There appeared to be a system designed. This is very efficient, from pre-digital times, but when you're time poor, doing research time poor, you just don't have the time to sort of go through those kind of processes to acquire those images.
So you would pull them back.
I think Pratt's war hero status, in a military campaign that defined Australia and New Zealand's key Anzac identity, combined with the eminent role of aviator and a continued association with the technologies of progress and speed, all marked Charles Pratt with distinction, marked as successfully converted to commercial success in a provincial setting. The prominent high definition vistas of Air Spy's black and white aerial photographs speak to this cultural elevation, offering a domesticated visual trace of the brutal military operations that spawned its technology and technique. Experienced the situation experienced directly by Pratt during the war. So now I'll just say a few things. I haven't got that much time, have I?
About 3 more minutes.
Okay, well I'll just talk a bit about Wolfgang Sievers. His photographs were much more visible within Australian cultural debates. Sievers landed in Australia in 1938. Out of here, a German national. He avoided conscription as an aerial photographer in the German Luftwaffe to become a preeminent industrial and architectural photographer in Australia. Sievers himself claimed to have been instrumental in changing the image of Australia as a country of wheat and wool to one of industry, craftsmen and scientific achievements. His father was an art and architectural historian, dismissed by the Nazi government, and his mother was a Jewish writer in education. He served in the Australian Army from 42 to 46. So when Helen Innes talks about Sievers' photographs, he seems to point out that they could have been taken anywhere. But for Paul Carter, they demonstrate the idea of this constant arrival of the migrant. You know, the migrant who doesn't want to arrive one, but always continues to arrive. Each new situation requiring a new set of responses, almost a new identity. Where former Ramadik, these images, like the Geelong Ford factory parking lot, surrounded by established suburban houses, ask, are we looking at an abandoned project or one that is newly begun? And this is a question that continually gets asked within Geelong anyway. So Sievers' images, I would suggest, communicate something beyond modernist aesthetic, suggesting an in-between space that delivers a kind of aesthetic of displacement common to the 50s and 60s migrant to Australia. Maybe I'll leave it there. My main point in sort of just outlining some of that history was to investigate and to assert that perhaps within those images themselves, we've now got to come to terms with that it's the images themselves that implicitly contain some of those histories. And I found when I looked at those two people and their own background, they seem to be, in terms of personality and in terms of aesthetic, sort of talk about the sort of wider kind of movements that were going on culturally at that time, and they were kind of their personalities and their success was also echoed the importance of that movement. Okay. So I'll stop there, and I can stop this now. You can look at this online if you want to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dirk. What I find fascinating having you after Laura's presentation is that I think you touch exactly on something which sets memory institutions apart from the general information space, which is just not about the here and now, which is what the art maps is, but there's a historic dimension to location. And I think trying to get that story, the historic dimension in the stories of our collections, I think that's a key element in what we're trying to achieve.
There's one point I can make about it was that sometimes those memories aren't accurate either, because one of the things that Demetrius remembered was the visit of Elvis Presley's pink Cadillac to Geelong as an exhibition. But it turns out when you do the research, it wasn't a pink Cadillac, but it was a gold Cadillac.
Yeah.
So this idea about this remembering those things that happens when you migrate from one technology to another, as well as one from one place to another, become embedded as mistakes, but of kind of interest in themselves.
A collective mistake.
Yeah.
Very interesting. That's research in itself. Is there one question before we head for the break? For Dirk? Thank you very much.
Thank you.